Good afternoon. This is Malika with Evanston Live TV, and we are here for our third episode of Nabors Speaks. Yes, Reverend Dr. Michael Nabors, also president of the North Shore NAACP chapter. He's given us every Monday, and I'm excited, every Monday some insight, and he always has some very deep perspectives on issues that are going on in the country and the world. And one of the things that's been on my mind, actually, it was two things that were really on my heart this weekend. One, those black pastors meeting with Trump. What the heck was all that about? And then two, 57 shootings in Chicago, mostly teens, that were gunned down. And, we've had all these rallies. We've shut down the Dan Ryan. And I'm just really thinking, are we not sending a loud enough message? Are we addressing the right people? Like, what's really going on? So I come to Pastor Nabors. So here's our third episode of Nabors Speaks.
Malika, I'm happy to be here. I am. Thank you for the invitation to be able to share a few remarks about a couple of subjects I think that are just so germane and so critical for our people in these days and times. And the first one, of course, is the meeting with the African American clergy and Donald Trump last week. As you probably know by now, the meeting was sort of called together by two of Trump's religious advisors. I think they sit on an evangelical board that supports Trump, and one of them is Paula White, who is the white female pastor from Florida, who pastors a very large church. It's a mega church with a substantial African American population. And the other was Daryl Scott, who is a pastor in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, who has been supportive of Donald Trump since he first talked about running for presidency in 2011. So the first thing I want to say, when you get an invitation from those two people, one of the things that would probably mark you off the list right away is any kind of theological differentiation that you have with them. And when you think about conservative evangelicalism, a couple of things stand out. One of them, of course, would be abortion. If you show any support of the issue of abortion, or if you show support of Planned Parenthood, I'm almost certain that you would not have been on that list to be invited to speak with Donald Trump. And the other issue is the LGBTQ community. If you showed any support for our homosexual brothers and lesbian sisters, then you also would not have been on that list. So it's very important for you to know that they cater to a particular clientele. And the folks that really came out in the news last week, there were two of them. One of them, Bishop Harry Jackson, who serves a church in Maryland, Beltsville, Maryland. And the other one was Pastor John Ward, who serves a church in Greenville, South Carolina. So looking at all of that, I'm outraged. You got to do your homework on these people and all of that. And one of the things that that I concluded is all of these people were of like mind. And while they may have been represented by the media and even by the folks supporting Trump as being in the majority in the African American community, they are not. They are a very, very small minority of individual ministers who are not a part of the larger national and international associations that most black churches are a part of. Not one of them was a part of, for instance, the National Baptist Convention. The National Baptist Convention is the largest body of African American Christians in the world. They have 8 million people that are a part of NBC. So the president of NBC was not invited, and as far as I know, neither were any of the other ministers. The same is true for the Council of Bishops for the African Methodist Episcopal Church. They represent, I think, at least 4 million African Americans in the country. None of them were in that group. Part of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, of which our church is a part of, they were not invited either, and neither was the American Baptist Convention, which is black and white. So we have this reality, and the reality is that those folks that are steering a religious sentiment in terms of following Trump are reaching out to people that are conservative, that are evangelical, and therefore they have a certain perspective about politics and about life in general. And so we, those who are not invited, have to stand up and say, wait a minute, you do not speak for us. You do not speak for the African American community. Really, you only speak for your own congregations and nobody else. Because these are churches that, Malika, are independent. You know, they're not a part of a larger association. They're independent churches. And for Darrell Scott, I know, and I think even for John Gray, I'm not sure about this, I think that they founded their own churches. So they are sort of the be-all, end-all, you know, for the group of people that follow those churches. As opposed to a church like Second Baptist where I am, or even a church like Trinity down on the south side in Philadelphia, we're part of a larger conglomerate of churches and pastors. And while we share our own independence, we're also a part of hundreds and thousands of other people that are like-minded. So I think it's reprehensible, not only that they met with Trump, but it's also reprehensible what came out of that meeting. Darrell Scott trying to suggest that Trump is the most pro-black president that ever lived. What is he thinking?
No.
How can anybody compare what Donald Trump has done with regard to African Americans during his tenure to so many other presidents? I mean, we can start with John F. Kennedy. We can go to Lyndon Baines Johnson, who signed the Civil Rights Bill, who signed the Voting Rights Bill. We can go all the way back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal plan, you know, during the Great Depression. We can go back to Abraham Lincoln, who was the signer of the Emancipation Proclamation. And to have the audacity and the gall to place Donald Trump above all of these people, it's just absolutely horrible. And I think it is a sign that the brother has definitely drunk deeply from the well of Kool-Aid, which has absolutely made him insane. I do not understand how he can be the pastor of a people, particularly African Americans, and move forward with this kind of thinking.
Now I remember last episode, you had said, Malika, it's just a very small percentage, like 1% of black people who really support Trump. But why is that 1% getting all this play?
Yeah. Well,
why are they getting a platform?
Yeah. Well, I think what's truly amazing is that it has to do with those people that are controlling various systems of media now. And when you look at media and the purpose of media, unfortunately, a part of the purpose of media is economically driven. They are in the business to make money, to be sustainable, and they're not necessarily in the business to create an opportunity for the best story to be heard. Right. Or for the right stories to be heard. They sort of cater to what they think is going to be controversial, because that means they're going to have more listeners and more viewers and that sort of thing. So I really believe that's what it's all about. I think that what we have to do, such as what we're doing right now, Malika, we have to find a larger platform for the kind of work that you're doing with your media, so that the other voices can be heard. The voices of the majority, and particularly the voices of the disenfranchised, the suffering, the oppressed, the marginalized, those masses of people, especially African American and other people of color, who are not heard by the major outlets like CNN, Fox, and MSNBC.
Now, if they really want some ratings, they can call Evanston Live TV. I will have Nabors, Trump, Farrakhan.
Yes, that's right.
Some real deal.
Yeah, Father Flagler, Otis Moss III, some of our wonderful female leaders who are doing a wonderful job. Deborah Scott at Ebenezer, Pastor Henderson at Bethel. We've got some major black male and female leaders who are doing a wonderful job, whose voices are not being heard.
Right. Yeah. If they want some ratings,
yes,
that's some fire you want to see, and to see how he would handle that would be interesting. What would be what would be the first thing you would say, if we had a round table and we brought, ministers that bring the fire and the truth, what would be the first thing you would say to Trump?
Well, Malika, let me put it like this, because I think this is very important, and I think this is not what the 40 African American ministers did last week. If that invitation came, the first thing that I would do is I would have an immediate call meeting of the members of Second Baptist Church. I serve at their disposal. They are, in effect, they are my bosses. I serve God, but they are the ones who called me to serve them as senior pastor. And I would say to them, I've got this invitation to have a roundtable discussion with Donald Trump. I would like your opinion. I would like your thoughts. Is this something I should do or something that I shouldn't do? It's this idea of the leaders sitting around the circle of the elders of the village so that we can sequester and receive knowledge, wisdom, and understanding from them. And I think what happens now is that religious leaders, they think they have all the answers themselves. So when an invitation like that comes, they don't talk to anybody. They don't make a phone call to anybody. They just say, oh, this is a great invitation, I'm going to take advantage of it. So that's the first thing that I would do. The second thing that I would do is I would try to make sure that the people that have been invited to that round table are people that I wholly and completely respect as leaders in their respective ministries. It would have to be the presidents of these conventions that I mentioned earlier. It would have to be representatives from the Council of AME bishops and, a large conglomerate of people with different perspectives and different ideas. And if all of that were okay and we were able to come and sit down at the round table, I believe that I would not ask Trump a question. I think that's too easy. I believe that I would make a statement. Yes, indeed. Yeah. And the statement that I would make would go all the way back to African heritage and history. It would go all the way back to the dynasties of ancient Egypt. It would go all the way back to when Egypt reigned supreme for 3,000 unparalleled years. And I would talk about the contributions and the power of people of color, not just Africans. I'd talk about China. I would talk about the Aborigines from Australia, every different kind of culture, every different kind of language and ethnic group making their contribution to the world. And then I would bring it up to the current reality where we are now. And I would ask him, how then could you, in your right mind, allow yourself to be surrounded by folks like Steve Bannon and other white nationalists who have been pushing an agenda that white people are somehow ipso facto superior to everybody else in the world? The knowledge of history ought to open your eyes and extend your horizons to make you a different person. And depending on how he looked, I would know whether or not he would be able to accept that and to grow and move forward or not. But to tell you the truth, Malika, I wouldn't even have to ask the question, because I know that he doesn't have the capacity to receive that knowledge, and he doesn't have the ability to extend his horizons. He is what he is. And I think that we have all known that now for a couple of years, and that's why we have to work as hard as we can to make sure that his time in the White House is limited, and that somehow he is going to go off into the horizons, never to be seen or heard from again, so that we can begin to move forward and bring this nation back together and reunite the people that have somehow been so divided because of his callousness, his hatred, and his terrible policies of racism and discrimination.
And that brings me to our other topic, which we'll just touch on for right now, but we're going to definitely dive into it next Monday, is the shootings.
Yes.
And you and I definitely agree that it's not just black on black crime. It stems from something so much deeper and larger than what we're seeing on the news in the media. So 57 gunned down overnight just this past weekend. So we're wondering, okay, where are these guns coming from? We know that it's anger, it's poverty, and anger and poverty stems from people like Bannon.
Yes, indeed. Yes. So, of course, you know, the majority of those who were gunned down were teenagers. I read a report coming in. I think there were 11 fatalities, and the majority of them were teenagers as well. So, obviously, we know that the one critical issue that we're facing as a nation, and that the city of Chicago is facing, has to do with gun control. There's no gun control policy. Guns are available no matter what the NRA has suggested. Guns are just as accessible today to folks who don't need them as they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 and 20 years ago. And of course, we see that in terms of the statistics over this past weekend. So we've got to do something about gun control. But that's not all. We've got to do other things as well. Somehow, certain groups of people are allowing these guns to come into areas where the marginalized lived, where they live, where there is this sort of gang warfare that is going on. Now, I will say, Malika, I don't believe in using the phrase black on black crime, because when it comes down to it, if you do a demographic of all of the crime that occurs in the United States, why is it that nobody talks about white on white crime? There's more crime that is done by white people against white people exponentially than there is black crime that is done against black people on black people. So that's a reality. So, but I do believe that we've got to do something. I believe that we shut down the Dan Ryan a few weeks ago. Our young people are bringing the necessity of gun control to the forefront since Florida, the tragic incident that occurred at Parkland, and we have got to listen to our young people, and at the same time caring folks in the community. That's the religious community, that's churches and mosques and synagogues, caring people in community organizations, and our local elected officials have got to get together and say, we have got to put an end to gun warfare and gun violence occurring in our communities. And I know this is going to sound awful. I know it's going to sound terrible, but we've got to get rid of guns, Malika, if we want to make sure that people are going to stop getting killed. So we've got to get rid of guns, and I know that sounds awful, and I know that I'm going to be taking over, the coals for making that kind of statement. But I don't believe in guns. I don't believe that they need to be in communities like Evanston or Chicago. I believe that we have to have another way of being able to deal with the crime that exists in our community than everybody having their own gun and defending themselves. This is not the Wild Wild West. This is the United States of America, and it's 2018.
Well, we're gonna dive into that a little deeper next Monday.
Okay,
I have my thoughts. Definitely have some questions.
Okay.
Want to get your perspective, because I definitely have my perspective. On it.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Okay.
So thank you so much.
Thank you, Malika.
Neighbors, for another episode of Neighbors Speaks. You all be sure to tune in next Monday.